The banker's handshake was firm, almost congratulatory, as she slid the document across her walnut desk. A single number, $89 million. The number that proved I was no longer a failure. The number that, 20 years later, would bring the son who abandoned me crawling back. But I had a price for him. Congratulations, Mr. Whitaker. The sale of Whitaker Precision Engineering is now complete. $89 million. I stared at the number on the paper. $89 million. The final tally after 35 years of building that company from the ground up, starting in my dimly lit garage. I watched it grow, year by grueling year, from welding small parts for local contractors to manufacturing components for defense contractors across North America. Every bead of sweat, every sleepless night, every risk taken, it all culminated in this single, life-altering figure, 89 million. The profound irony of that number was a cold, sharp realization. It was the absolute measure of a success I once believed was impossible. 20 years ago, I'd been standing in a food pantry line in South Side, wondering if I'd have enough to feed myself that week. My son Ethan had made it very clear back then that a failure like me had no place in his life or near his new wife's family. His exact words actually spoken in the driveway of my repossessed house. "You're an embarrassment, Dad. Lauren's father is a doctor. What am I supposed to tell them? That my dad can't even keep a job?" I pocketed the banker's card and walked out into the crisp Chicago autumn afternoon. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. "Dad." I stopped walking. 20 years of silence. And now this. Ethan's voice, older but unmistakable. "Dad, it's Ethan. I need to talk to you. It's important." I stood there on Michigan Avenue watching business people hurry past, everyone chasing their own version of success. "How did you get this number?" I hired someone, a private investigator. "Look, I know we haven't spoken, but I saw the article in the Chicago Tribune about your company sale. Dad, I'm in trouble. Real trouble. Can we meet?" Part of me wanted to hang up right there, but I'd spent 20 years imagining this moment, running through scenarios, wondering what I'd say if he ever came back. I'd be lying if I said I didn't want to see him to understand what had turned my son into someone who could abandon his father at rock bottom. "Where are you?" "I'm actually in Chicago. I'm staying at the Four Seasons. Can you come by, please?" I should have known better. The Four Seasons, one of the most expensive hotels in the city. If he was in such terrible trouble, what was he doing there? That single question was the only thing I needed to confirm everything I already suspected about him and his timing. "I'll be there in an hour," I said, and ended the call. I took my time walking to the hotel, letting the September breeze clear my head. 20 years. I'd been 49 when Ethan cut me off. A middle-aged man, not yet old, but suddenly feeling every year of it. I'd lost my job as a plant supervisor when the steel fabrication plant I worked for went bankrupt during the 2008 financial crisis. 23 years of loyal service, gone overnight, dissolved into history as quickly as a bad memory. I remember standing there, staring at the locked gates, feeling the same gut punch I felt when I lost her. My wife had passed away just 2 years before that from cancer. The debt I'd taken on to cover the medical costs that our insurance wouldn't touch was a heavy ghost, a debt I was still paying for with my dignity. It was a dual grief, the death of a future and the death of my love, all crushing me at once. Ethan was 26 then, newly married to Lauren Harrington, whose family owned a chain of optometry practices across Washington State. I remembered the engagement party at their mansion in Lake Forest. That night was a brutal lesson in class and distance. I felt utterly out of place in my department store suit, a cheap uniform amongst the sea of designer labels. Lauren's father, Dr. Harrington, had barely acknowledged me, treating me like an inconvenient shadow. When he finally did, it was only to ask what I did for a living. I told him I was a supervisor at an auto parts plant, and he'd simply looked at me, his eyes empty, and said, "I see," before turning away. That dismissive pause, that single cold phrase, it wasn't just a slight. It was the entire world telling me I didn't matter. After I lost my job, the forecast of my life got worse, fast. After I lost my job, things got worse fast. The credit union foreclosed on my house. I moved into a basement apartment in Gary. Ethan came by once, saw the place, and I watched something die in his eyes. Disappointment, shame. He made excuses about why he couldn't help. Lauren's family had expectations. They were planning to invest in a business for him. They couldn't be associated with failure. The last time I saw him was the day I moved out of the foreclosed house. He stood in the driveway, a figure of comfortable, callous youth, with Lauren waiting patiently in their Audi. He told me I was an embarrassment, that it was better if we didn't stay in touch. He said he needed to focus on his future, not be dragged down by my past. "You're an embarrassment, Dad." I heard that echo, a wound that never truly closed. I won't lie, his words that day in the driveway broke something vital inside me. But in the ashes of that abandonment, it also forged something new, something resilient and hard, like the steel I used to work with. It was a new kind of freedom, the freedom of having nothing left to lose. The Four Seasons lobby was exactly as opulent as I remembered from the one time I'd been here for a business meeting. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, staff in crisp uniforms. I gave Ethan's room number at the desk. The concierge called up, then directed me to the elevators, room 2847. I knocked. Ethan opened the door, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. He'd aged, of course, 46 now, with gray threading through his dark hair, lines around his eyes. He was thinner than I remembered, and there was something defeated in his posture. "Dad." His voice cracked slightly. The voice of a drowning man reaching for the only lifeboat he'd ever thrown away. "Come in, please." The suite was massive, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a living area that could fit my old apartment twice over. But I noticed the details: the empty bottle of bourbon on the coffee table, the laptop with what looked like spreadsheets open, red numbers prominent, the rumpled appearance of someone who hadn't slept well in days. "Nice place," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "It's not mine. Lauren's parents own a share in the hotel chain. We're separated, have been for 6 months. I didn't sit, even though he gestured to the couch. You said you were in trouble." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's an understatement. "Dad, I'm bankrupt. The business, everything. I owe $1.2 million. The Harringtons cut me off. Lauren filed for divorce. I have nothing." I watched him carefully. Waited. I know I don't deserve to ask. I know what I said, what I did, but you're my father. The article said, "You sold your company for $89 million. I need help, just enough to get back on my feet. Maybe $2 million. I have business ideas. I just need capital to stop." He stopped. "Tell me something, Ethan. In 20 years, did you ever wonder how I was doing? If I was alive or dead? If I was sleeping on the street or had a roof over my head?" He looked down. "I thought about you. I couldn't, what? Dial a phone, send an email, or couldn't face the fact that you chose your wife's money over your own father? It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that." I kept my voice level, almost conversational. This was the moment I'd rehearsed in my mind countless times, but now that it was here, I felt strangely calm. "You called me an embarrassment. You said I was a failure. You told me not to contact you because you had to think about your future. I was young. I made mistakes. You were 26 years old, Ethan, old enough to know exactly what you were doing." I walked to the window, looked out at the skyline. "Do you want to know what happened after you cut me off?" He didn't answer, but I continued anyway. I spent 3 months in that gary basement apartment, applying for every job I could find. No one wanted a 49-year-old former supervisor with a massive gap in his employment history. The money ran out. I started going to food pantries, a memory anchor I shared with a younger version of myself 20 years ago. I sold everything I owned except the essential tools in my truck. Your mother's wedding ring paid for 2 months of rent and groceries. I felt his sharp inhale behind me, the sound of a truth finally landing. One night, I was staring at the last $67 I had in the world, and I was given a choice: give up and drown, or use that meager amount to register a business. That choice was the rebirth, Whitaker Precision Engineering. I started by offering mobile welding and repair services. I'd drive to construction sites, factories, anywhere that needed metal work. I slept in my truck sometimes to save on rent, ate 1 meal a day, worked 16-hour days. I turned to face him. His eyes were red. It took me 2 years to get stable, 5 years to land my first major contract, 10 years to open my own facility, 15 years to start manufacturing our own parts, and 20 years to build something valuable enough that 3 different companies wanted to buy it. I chose the one that promised to keep all my workers employed. Dad, I'm not finished. I sat down finally across from him. During all those years, do you know how many times I thought about calling you? Hundreds. Thousands. Especially in the beginning when I was at my lowest. I wanted my son. I wanted to hear your voice, to know you didn't really mean what you said. A tear rolled down his cheek, but I never called. Do you know why? He shook his head. Because you taught me something important that day in the driveway. You taught me that I had to be able to stand on my own, that depending on anyone else, even family, even my own son, was a weakness. You taught me that blood doesn't mean loyalty, and love doesn't mean support. You taught me that the only person I could truly rely on was myself. I'm sorry, he whispered. God, Dad, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I was cruel. I've had 20 years to regret it, and I do every single day. I believe you, and I did. I could see it in every line of his face, hear it in every word. But sorry doesn't change the past, and it doesn't change what you came here for today. He wiped his eyes. I know I have no right to ask, but I'm desperate. The creditors are circling. I might lose everything. I just need a chance, like the chance you gave me. That stopped him cold. I leaned forward. Let me ask you something. If I'd somehow become successful back then, would you have cut me off? Before I tell you what I did next, think about that. Would you have done the same? If this story resonates with you, make sure to like and subscribe, because the hardest part of the story is still to come. If Dr. Harrington had been impressed by my wealth instead of disgusted by my lack of it, would you have told me I was an embarrassment? No, of course not. Then your love was conditional, based on what I could offer you, how I reflected on you. That's not love, Ethan. That's transaction. What do you want me to say? That I was a terrible son? Fine, I was. I am. But I'm still your son. Doesn't that mean anything? I stood up. It means everything. That's why I came here today. That's why I let you say your piece. But here's what's going to happen now. I pulled out an envelope from my jacket pocket. I'd prepared it months ago after I'd first gotten inquiries about selling my company. Call it intuition. Call it preparation. But something told me this moment was coming. This is a check for $75,000. His eyes widened. It's enough to pay for a decent apartment for a year, food, basic expenses. It's enough to give you time to find a real job, not to start another business, but to work for someone else. To learn humility, to understand what it means to build something from the ground up with your own hands. Dad, that's not nearly enough to. There are conditions. I held up the envelope, keeping it out of his reach. 1. You will not contact me again until you have paid back every dollar of this $75,000, not from family money, not from another failed business, but from honest work. His face fell. 2. You will get professional help, therapy, because the person who could abandon his father the way you did has deeper, more corrosive problems than money can ever fix. Dad. 3. You will volunteer 20 hours a month at a food pantry, a homeless shelter, somewhere that serves people at their lowest. You need to look into the eyes of true desperation to understand what rock bottom actually looks like, not the gilded version you're experiencing now. Ethan stared, his mouth slightly open. You can't be serious, he managed. I'm completely serious. I'm completely serious. And 4, you will write me a letter by hand once a month, not asking for anything, not updating me on your progress, just reflecting on what you've learned. I may not respond. I haven't decided yet, but you will write them. And if I do all that, then maybe we can start to rebuild something. Not what we had, because that's dead and buried, but something new, something honest. He stared at the envelope. $75,000 for 20 years of nothing. That's what I'm worth to you. No, I said quietly. That's what you're worth to yourself right now. Nothing. You've proven you can't be trusted with real money or real responsibility. You've proven you'll cut and run when things get hard. You've proven your love has a price tag. I set the envelope on the coffee table. This is me giving you a chance to prove you can be more than that. Take it or leave it. But understand this. If you don't take it, I walk out that door and you never see me again. And if you do take it and you break any of those conditions, the same thing happens. You get one chance, Ethan. Just one, which is one more than you gave me. He looked at the envelope, then at me, then back at the envelope. His hand trembled as he reached for it. Why? He asked. Why are you even offering this? I don't deserve it. You're right, I said, my voice quiet but cutting. You don't deserve it. I headed toward the door. But I do. This was the truth I had carried for months, the unspoken reason for the entire performance. I deserved to know I tried. I deserved to know I was the bigger person. And I deserved to sleep at night knowing that when my son was drowning, I threw him a rope, a lifeline, even though he had deliberately left me to drown 20 years ago. It was the one thing he couldn't take from me, my own character. I opened the door, then paused. One more thing. The private investigator you hired cost you $8,000, according to my lawyer, who's been monitoring any inquiries about me since the sale was announced. You spent $8,000 to find me, so you could ask for $1 million. That's what this entire 20-year silence was worth. A business transaction, an investment opportunity. It was never about me. Think about that. Think about how that looks. Think about what it says about who you've become. His face went white. You knew I was coming. I knew someone would come. Whether it was you, Lauren's family trying to get a piece, or some other ghost from my past. When you have money, Ethan, everyone who ever ignored you suddenly remembers you exist. I wanted to see which category you fell into, I said, holding his gaze. Friend or vulture? And which am I? He whispered. I looked at my son, really looked at him. I saw the defeat in his shoulders, the desperation in his eyes, the way he clutched that envelope like a lifeline. Part of me still saw the little boy who used to help me in the garage. Part of me saw the man who'd called me an embarrassment. That depends on what you do next, I told him. It was the hardest decision of my life, but I knew it was the right one. The question is, what would you have done? Would you have given him the $2 million or the $75,000 rope? Let me know in the comments below. The friend honors the conditions and does the work. The vulture cashes the check and disappears until they need more. I left him there in that expensive hotel room, staring at $75,000. It was a check that probably felt like an insult compared to the $2 million he'd asked for, but it was the exact amount he needed to become someone new. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have. The lobby seemed brighter, louder. Outside, the autumn air was cold on my face. I've volunteered over 1,000 hours. I've written you 18 letters and you've responded exactly once. I don't know if that means you've forgiven me or if you ever will, but I need you to know something. When I walked out of that hotel room with your envelope, I was angry. I thought you were being cruel, petty, getting revenge for what I'd done. I spent the first week plotting how to turn that $75,000 into more, how to prove you wrong about me being incapable. But then, I cashed that check, and I paid my first month's rent on a modest apartment, and I bought groceries with my own money that came from you. And something shifted. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't living off someone else's success, not Lauren's family's money, not my own inherited privilege, not even borrowed money. It was a gift from my father, but it came with a price. I had to become someone worthy of it. The job at the plant broke me down physically at first. I wasn't used to manual labor, to working with my hands, to being exhausted at the end of the day. But it also showed me what you'd done for all those years when I was growing up. How hard you'd worked to provide for Mom and me. It was barely a page, handwritten on lined paper like I'd specified. He wrote about getting a job at a manufacturing plant in Joliet, not management, just floor work, about how his back ached at the end of shifts, about how humbling it was to take orders from a supervisor half his age, about starting therapy, and how hard it was to talk about what he'd done. I didn't respond, but I kept the letter. The second letter came right on schedule. He wrote about volunteering at a homeless shelter, about a man named Richard who reminded him of me, about how Richard had lost everything in a divorce and had been sleeping rough for 2 years, about how easily that could have been me if I hadn't clawed my way back up. I still didn't respond, but I kept that letter too. By the 6th month, the letters were getting longer, more introspective. He wrote about Lauren, about how their marriage had been built on the wrong foundation, about how her family's money had made him soft, entitled, about how losing everything was the best thing that ever happened to him, even though it didn't feel that way at the time. I understand now, he wrote in month 7, why you only gave me $75,000. I would have wasted $2 million. I would have tried to rebuild my old life, the one built on shortcuts and family, money, and image over substance. This way, I have to build something real, something that's actually mine the way you did. Month 8, he sent pictures. Him at the food pantry sorting donations. Him at the shelter serving meals. Him at his apartment, modest and clean, with a bookshelf full of books. He was actually reading personal finance, manufacturing processes, biographies of people who'd built themselves from nothing. Month 9, he wrote that he'd paid back $10,000. He'd been putting away every spare dollar, living on almost nothing. His supervisor at the plant had noticed his work ethic and offered him a team lead position with a small raise. He'd turned it down. Not yet, he wrote. I need to prove I can do this at the bottom before I even think about moving up. That letter, I responded to. Just 3 words. I'm watching closely. Month 12, he'd paid back $25,000. His therapist had helped him understand that his fear of failure had driven him to abandon me rather than face the possibility of becoming like me. But you were never a failure, Dad, he wrote. You were just someone going through a hard time. I was the failure for not seeing the difference. Month 15, he met someone, a woman named Jennifer who worked at the shelter. She had her own story of rebuilding after loss. She knows about you, he wrote. About what I did, about what I'm trying to become. She says the fact that I'm working this hard to make amends shows growth. I hope she's right. Month 18. The debt was paid, all $75,000 plus interest I hadn't asked for. He sent the final check with a letter that was 10 pages long. Dad, I've fulfilled all your conditions. I've volunteered over 1,000 hours. I've written you 18 letters and you've responded exactly once. I don't know if that means you've forgiven me or if you ever will, but I need you to know something. When I walked out of that hotel room with your envelope, I was angry. I thought you were being cruel, petty, getting revenge for what I'd done. I spent the first week plotting how to turn that $75,000 into more, how to prove you wrong about me being incapable. But then I cashed that check, and I paid my first month's rent on a modest apartment, and I bought groceries with my own money that came from you, and something shifted. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't living off someone else's success, not Lauren's family's money, not my own inherited privilege, not even borrowed money. It was a gift from my father, but it came with a price. I had to become someone worthy of it. The job at the plant broke me down physically at first. I wasn't used to manual labor, to working with my hands, to being exhausted at the end of the day, but it also showed me what you'd done for all those years when I was growing up, how hard you'd worked to provide for Mom and me, how tired you must have been, and yet you never complained. Never made me feel like your work was beneath anyone. The volunteer work broke me down emotionally. I saw people who'd lost everything, and so many of them reminded me of what you went through, but I also saw their dignity, their resilience, their hope. I saw that poverty doesn't make someone a failure. Giving up does, and you never gave up. The therapy broke me down mentally. I had to face truths about myself I'd spent years avoiding, that I was shallow, that I valued image over substance, that I'd absorbed Lauren's family's classism and made it my own, that I'd been a coward who'd run from difficulty instead of facing it. These 18 months have been the hardest of my life, but they've also been the most important. I'm not the same person who walked into that hotel room. I'm not even the same person who walked out of your driveway 20 years ago. I don't expect you to welcome me back with open arms. I don't expect you to forget what I did. But I hope someday you might be willing to meet me for cafe to let me introduce you to Jennifer, to see the person I'm becoming instead of the person I was. I love you, Dad. I always have, even when I was too broken to show it. But now I understand that love isn't enough. Love without respect, without honor, without sacrifice, is just an empty word. I'm learning to live those things, not just say them. Thank you for the $75,000. But more than that, thank you for believing I could be more than I was, even when I didn't believe it myself. Your son, Ethan. I read that letter 3 times, sitting at my desk in my new home, a modest house in the Gold Coast neighborhood of Chicago. Not the mansion I could afford, but something comfortable and real. I'd donated $55 million to various causes, veteran supports, job training programs, food pantries across the United States. I'd set up a scholarship fund for children of laid-off workers. I'd invested the rest conservatively. I picked up my phone and dialed. Hello? Ethan answered immediately, hope and fear mixing in his voice. There's a cafe on Oak Street, I said. The Brood Awakening, Saturday morning 9 Sao. Come alone. I'll be there. Dad, thank you. Ethan, yes. Don't thank me yet. We have a lot to talk about and most of it won't be comfortable. But if you're willing to do the work, real work, on actually rebuilding something, then maybe we can figure out what a father and son look like when they're both starting from scratch. There was a pause. Then I'll be there. I promise. Good. One more thing. Anything. The next time you want to know if I'm proud of you, don't wait for me to say it. Look in the mirror at the man who paid back $75,000 by working an honest job, who volunteered 1,000 hours of his time, who went to therapy and did the hard work of changing. Be proud of him, because I am. I heard him crying on the other end of the line, but they were different tears than that day in the hotel. These were clean somehow. Earned. See you Saturday, I said, and hung up. I walked to my back deck and looked out at the small patio I'd started. The setting sun, now a brilliant wash of orange and gold over Chicago, felt less like an ending and more like the dawn of a new, hard-earned peace. For 2 decades, I had carried the weight of my son's rejection, a profound, corrosive wound. But standing here, smelling the earth of my small tomato and basil garden, I finally understood that my $89 million wasn't the ultimate triumph. This moment of quiet strength was. The check for $75,000 was never a transaction. It was a blueprint for his character. It wasn't about the money, which was easy. It was about the tough love required to break a cycle of entitlement and cowardice. Ethan needed to be broken down, physically by honest work, emotionally by service, and mentally by facing his own shame in therapy. Seeing his earned tears and reading his 18 letters, each one a painful confession of growth, was my true vindication. This Saturday meeting at the Brood Awakening is not a reunion. It's a shared commitment to building something new, something honest, starting from scratch. It's the profound realization that success isn't measured in dollars, but in character, and character is built by what you overcome. To anyone holding on to a painful silence, an unforgiven wrong, or a fear that you're not enough, don't wait for a crisis to define your worth. Your character is your greatest asset. Start building it today. True love is the courage to give someone the hard, necessary tools, even if they ask for easy money. Now, it is Ethan's turn, and the rest, as in all our lives, is truly up to him.